Good evening. I am the Maven of the Eventide. Welcome to Vampire Review. Tonight, we discuss Kevin Grevious's and Len Wiseman's 2003 film, Underworld. Pitched as Romeo and Juliet for vampires and werewolves, it came out right on the coattails of the Blade and Matrix sequels. It's another vampire action movie featuring unlimited magazine shootout scenes and badass long coats galore. The film depicts a world where vampires and werewolves, or lycans as they're called here, have been battling each other in a war for centuries. Or correction, all the werewolves have been battling an especially badass group of vampires called the Death Dealers. The other vampires don't really do much outside of parties and politics. But the Death Dealers are our focus, or rather one in particular, Celine. It's her unlife's goal to hunt down and kill every last lycan in the world, and she does it with style and ripped-off fashion sense. Vampires versus werewolves. The age-old battle is classic and epic as pirates versus ninjas, or Kirk versus Picard, or ketchup versus catsup. You're either on one side or the other, and there's just no reconciling. This isn't good versus evil, right versus wrong. This is team spirit, pure and simple. And people just love to take sides in arbitrary rivalries. But it was not always this way. In fact, in Eastern European legends of yore, vampires were actually dead werewolves that rose from the grave. It wasn't until Abbott and Costello met Frankenstein in 1948 that we first saw the two species square off against each other as sworn enemies, when the Wolfman had to personally kick Dracula's ass. And the notion of two forms of ancient evil entwined in an epic battle of immortal monstrosity became an instant classic. After all, such rivalry is engaging and relatable. Like real-world battles that started over long-forgotten reasons, the fighting just continues on for the sake of fighting. As the years in cinema wore on, we saw it again in a few other places. But it wasn't until the 1991 White Wolf World of Darkness role-playing games came along that it really officially became a thing. Not that I know anybody like that. No, I personally credit Underworld with bringing the vampire versus werewolf trope to the mainstream popular consciousness. After 2003, the war was on, and the rest is history. So, vampires versus werewolves, team spirit, choose your sides. Not that it's hard to choose the right side, it's obvious, right? Even in Underworld, just look at the difference between how the vampires party and how the werewolves party. Personally, this debate has always confounded me. How can it even be a debate? Do people actually think that werewolves can compare to the almighty vampire? Just what is the appeal of werewolves? They're just such slobs. I just don't get it. I think I need to phone an expert on this one. Where is my bat phone? Ooh, my blue fang. Call the she-wolf.
Hello?
Good evening.
Oh, hey, Lisa, what's up?
Shh, call me Maven, while the night envelops us.
Okay. Why are you talking like that?
Lupa. As a werewolf, can you tell me what the appeal is to fans?
What? I'm not a werewolf.
Oh, come on. You're not fooling anyone. You've got the,
I'm not.
So you're saying that werewolves are so unappealing compared to vampires that even a werewolf herself would be ashamed to admit what she is?
What? No.
Sure.
And what do you mean compared to vampires? Vampires suck.
But werewolves are so dirty and hairy and smelly.
Well, vampires are a bunch of pussyfooted snobs.
There is nothing wrong with having a little class.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with being in touch with your inner animal.
Aha! So you admit it, you are a werewolf.
Seriously?
Oh, come on. I heard you howling at the moon last night.
That wasn't me.
You lie!
Oh, I'm not putting up with this anymore. I'm hanging up on you, you sparkle turd.
What? Wait, are you insinuating that I am a vampire?
You're a big, fanged weenie.
Oh, come on. That's just ridiculous. Seriously, she thinks I'm a vampire? What planet is she on? Anyway, where was I? Ah, yes. Underworld was the brainchild of Kevin Grievous with the help of Len Wiseman, who he met when they were both working on a set of Stargate. It's Wiseman's directorial debut, and Mark Grievous's biggest on-screen role to date, in the part he wrote for himself. Yes, that's the guy who came up with Underworld, though why he would choose to play a werewolf in his own vampire movie, I have no idea. He's a self-proclaimed Marvel zombie and a huge comic book nerd. He's written for Marvel and DC. But despite Underworld's comic panel coloring aesthetic, the story is an entirely original idea and not based on any prior media at all. That is, unless you ask White Wolf, who sued Sony for 17 counts of copyright infringement, including over 70 points of similarity between Underworld and their games and Nancy Collins' World of Darkness novel, Love of Monsters, which was a Romeo and Juliet werewolf vampire love story. Now, I don't know about his familiarity with RPGs, but does this really look like the kind of guy who would be reading Nancy Collins? Grievous proudly admits that the character of Selene was inspired by Marvel's Dark Queen Selene, but other than that, Sony refuted the accusations and claimed Underworld was 100% their original creation. The fact that they used silver nitrate bullets and called the werewolf-vampire hybrid an abomination? Pure coincidence. To be fair, it's not like White Wolf exactly invented any of that stuff itself. All of those 70-plus points of similarity have been around in countless vampire media for years. The lawsuit was settled outside of court in secret, though, so we'll never really find out who ripped off whom. But really, White Wolf, you should be thanking them. Who was into vampires versus werewolves before, except for a few RPG geeks and some lit nerds? When Underworld came along, it became cool. Besides, you don't see Matrix suing them, do you? Yes, Underworld, entirely original in its constant nighttime rain, and blue and white and black and gray. Everyone's hair is always wet because they're all too sexy for umbrellas. But the thing about Underworld I do admire is how seriously it takes itself. You can tell that this script was someone's baby. These guys were really into this movie, and their passion for it shows through. Now, if only they had managed to make a good movie instead of a bad one. Now, I'm not saying it's awful, but it's weak. The action between the action is slow. The characters' choices are mostly undermotivated, and the dialogue is trite.
Expect me to believe that a mangy animal came up with the bullets specifically engineered to kill vampires.
Though I don't think there's anything this guy could say that would sound good no matter how brilliant the writing. Honestly, even if the rest of the movie was gold, Shane Brawling's acting just about kills the entire thing for me. He plays Craven, one of the antagonists, though you don't find out just how bad he is until well into the movie. He starts off as the vampire leader of Selene's coven, and is at first just a creep who wants in her tight pleather pants like nobody's business. Much to the dismay of Erica here. Meanwhile, Selene's unnaturally obsessed with her asleep father, Victor.
Victor would believe me. Now that Victor's awake, we'll see what he has to say about that.
And her only buddy in the coven is the weapons designer, Khan. Craven, Erica, Victor, Khan, and then later we've got Marcus and Corvin and... Alright, who told the writers that it was required for names to have V's or R's or K's in them in order for them to sound vampire-y? I mean, maybe it's narcissistic on Kevin Grievous's part? I'll bet if he didn't have Marvel's character to name Selene after, she would have been Veronica or Raven. But still, come on, Craven is the name of the cowardly evil character? They even already had a Corvin. Who would name a vampire Craven? I mean, that sounds like... But anyway, yes, despite the movie's lack of artistic success, probably due to the fact that it was a first-time director, Underworld at least tries really hard. It's got a lot of heart. This really shows through in the convoluted backstory mythology about the origin of their species and the history of the war they're fighting. And it's interesting that these vampires aren't based on anything religious or supernatural. Their origin is entirely scientific. Long ago in the 1200s, there was a human who survived a plague named Alexander Corvinus, and the virus granted him immortality. He had 3 sons, Marcus, William, and other. One day, Marcus was bitten by a bat, and for some reason this turned him into the first vampire. And then one day, William was bitten by a wolf, and for some reason this turned him into the first werewolf. And Other just had a bunch of babies, apparently, and descendants. The original werewolves were just big monster wolves, but the second generation produced the shape-shifting lycans, and that's when Lucian came along. Played by Michael Sheen, he's a lycan leader and is set up as the chief antagonist in the war. He's been pretending to be dead for centuries while he secretly rebuilds the lycan population. Meanwhile, with the help of Craven the traitor, Lucian seeks out the descendant of Mr. Other Corvinus, because if he can find a pure bloodline, he'll be able to use it to combine his lycan blood with vampire blood and become a super powerful hybrid. Celine becomes aware of this plan when she notices some lycans stalking Michael Corvin, the love interest here. He's the chosen one who holds the DNA key to creating hybrids. Later, we find out that even though Lucian is doing all this and the vampires thought for centuries that he was to blame for their war, it was actually Victor who started it all. Played by Bill Nye. Victor's one of the vampire leaders, and long ago his daughter Sonia fell in love with Lucian and got knocked up. Victor had Sonia killed in front of Lucian to destroy their hybrid baby, and so Lucian retaliated. Lucian doesn't want to fight anymore and hopes to end the war by creating a hybrid and uniting the two species. Turns out he's not such a bad guy after all, and really it was Victor all along, blaming the lycans for those he killed, like Celine's family, which he's been lying to her about for 700 years. Drama, betrayal, intrigue, ancient feuds over lost love. This is good stuff, Shakespearean even, and it isn't even in the movie other than a brief mention and a flashback. Later on they did make an entire movie out of it, but yeah, that went well. To be fair, the reason Rise of the Lycans fails is not due to the backstory premise idea, but if we deem the history good, it's left to the present to reveal why this movie falls flat. Let's get back to our vampires. So, because the nature of their condition is entirely scientific, the issue of morality is stripped from the character's struggle. None of the vampires are concerned for their souls or unhappy to be what they are. No one angsts over the loss of their mortal lives or bemoans that they are evil and unnatural. This means that the condition doesn't provide any tragedy or conflict in any of the characters, and as such, we can almost forget that they're any different than humans. The moral issues amongst them come from betrayals between their own kind. When Craven plots to kill the elder vampire Amelia, it's no different than a human betraying his leader for selfish political reasons. And when Celine finds out that Victor lied to her about killing her parents, she doesn't lament that he turned her into a monster or even respond to his retort that he gave her immortality.
Is it not a fair trade, the life I have granted you?
She's only hurt by the murder as she would be if a human had done the same thing.
Your own flesh and blood?
Additionally, these vampires don't feed off humans. They can, but instead they drink synthetic and cloned blood. The only time we see Celine bite anyone is when she changes Michael, and even then she doesn't drink his blood. She feeds her blood to the sleeping Victor in order to share her memories, but the rest of the blood drinking comes out of a plastic bag. This eliminates the ethical struggle that audiences usually have to deal with when understanding vampires as characters. These vampires don't have to cope with being sinners or killers of innocence. They only kill lycans. They express no violence, temptation, lust, or guilt towards humans at all in these civilized modern times. Aside from Michael, humans barely even exist. They only provide a playing field for the supernatural creatures like trees in a forest. After the opening scene, in fact, the streets are usually mysteriously empty in this nondescript nameless city of purposefully unnamed country. So, without ever seeing these creatures interact with the human population, the fact that they're different becomes meaningless to the audience. So then, why do we care that they're vampires? Why does it matter what makes them compelling? Aside from Celine's superpower fighting skills, how is she different from the heroes in the Matrix? The fact that she's nocturnal and UV bullets will kill her? Well, there are no daytime shots in the entire movie, so how does the audience really even grasp that the sun ever comes up in this world, or care that daylight is even something these vampires have to deal with? And speaking of superpowers, let's just take a moment to examine those. Here, we see Erica jump onto the ceiling and stick to it. And here, Celine jumps several stories and lands perfectly. She also heals quickly and can all but dodge bullets. But then here, she can't outrun a human. And apparently they don't have much of heightened sight or hearing because these guys sneak up on them. Also, after Lucian stabs Celine in the shoulder, she faints. She faints! She's like 700 years old and a hardened warrior, and she doesn't even know her own limits?
Now shut up and hold on, I'll be fine.
No, you won't! This is ridiculously incongruous compared to how tough she is previously. And the only reason it happens is so that Michael can rescue her. Why? To justify this scene.
Why did you bring him here? You saved my life.
Because the script says so. Another thing. See, if she possessed vampire super speed, when she loses Michael in the elevator, she could just run to the stairs and catch up with him and then maybe just be there when the doors open. But no, she doesn't have this power because the filmmakers thought it would be cooler if she instead had to shoot her way through the floor. Seriously? Celine, there was a door to the stairs right there, and it's only one flight down, and those are silver bullets, too. Do you know how soft those are? How many silver bullets does it take to shoot through a floor? Mythbusters attempted to reproduce this stunt, and they couldn't even do it with 10 times the ammo. I'm not going to spend much time going into the werewolf stuff in this movie, but one thing I do have to say, I guess, is that even though we get a lot of werewolf fighting action scenes, the Lycans as characters aren't anyone we care about. Once they shift, you can't tell them apart. And when they're slaughtered, the audience feels no connection to their deaths. They're just shooting fodder. This is disposable video game enemy logic. The only 3 Lycans with personality are Rays, played by the creator of the story, who's a bit part anyway. Dr. Evil here, who we never see transform into a wolf. For most of the film, I couldn't help wondering if maybe he was just a human doctor who the Lycans were using. And Lucian, who we also never see transform except in his underwater flashback. See, that just goes to prove my point that people don't like werewolves. How could the audience find this character sympathetic if they ever saw him turn into a werewolf? So it's more like vampires versus this guy, who's not even really all that bad. But in the end, it's Craven who betrays his own kind, and Victor, who's obsessed with keeping the bloodlines pure. Craven, true to his name, flees like a coward, and Celine and hybrid Michael battle Victor to the death. Hold on a second. Why did it make that noise? It was just sitting there. Did the sound effect guys think we wouldn't know what it was if it didn't make that noise? Like, just in case you aren't sure this is a sword, here's some extra oomph. Does every weapon she look at make a sound effect? After Victor's defeated and all the vampires and Lycans have killed each other off, there's really no one left to fight, nothing left to fight for. Celine and Michael are apparently in love somehow, and the movie ends. So, in conclusion, Underworld gets an A for effort, but fails in execution. The supernatural aspect to these creatures is entirely superficial and does nothing to develop them as characters. The intricacies and depths of the many possible themes and allegories that a vampires vs. werewolves story could provide are wasted in this film for the sake of action and visuals. And for something that was marketed as a Romeo and Juliet story, the romance plot is practically non-existent. In the theatrical release, Michael and Celine don't even kiss. It was in the trailer, but you don't get it in the actual film unless you've got the extended cut. They exchange a few long looks, but they never have time to develop their relationship into romance at all. They're not in love. They've only known each other 3 days as it is. I don't know, maybe it's magical hybrid chemistry or something. Yes, I know Romeo and Juliet fell in love in 5 minutes, but they were teenagers. Considering the fact that for the past 700 years or so, Celine has only cared about her job and shown no interest in dating, I find this romance really difficult to swallow, and entirely unrelatable, and therefore uninteresting.
They kill you too just for helping me.
It doesn't help that Scott Speedman as Michael is about as interesting as toast.
He's attractive.
Sure he is, if you like a man who can chew his own cud.
Why can't you just answer the question?
Now, I'm not saying that a vampire story needs religion or the supernatural to be meaningful. But the lore here is entirely disconnected from the world's human population. These characters don't live in an underworld. There's no real world for them to be under. They actually live in a giant mansion right out in the open that apparently no one ever notices. And yet the franchise still churned out 3 sequels. And there's at least 1 more on the way! What can I say? Audiences love dark action girls in catsuits, and as long as vampires are the hot in thing, they're gonna keep on coming. I am the Maven of the Eventide, and next time, I'm gonna review a real vampire film.
Well, vampires are a bunch of sparkle turds. Well, vampires are a bunch of fanged wussies. Well, vampires are the poops of the supernatural world. Well, vampires are another fecal-related snobby reference. Well, vampires are a bunch of pussy-footed know-it-alls. Well, vampires are a bunch of snobs, and I don't like them because they think they're better than me. Well, vampires are snobby and ugly.